All right. My name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined by Matthew Vernon Whalan, who's, I gotta say, looking pretty sharp today. It's like I don't know if there was some recent haircut and grooming or what happened here.
Dude, I'm the best man.
Yeah.
The best man doesn't stop on wedding day. Okay, time that's life too. My
Fair
brother's
enough.
married, so I got
All right.
and I'm the best man now.
Yeah, fair enough.
Never been the best man at anything before.
Yeah, and it seems like that wedding was a little while ago, so you're maintaining it. I like it.
Riding that high,
yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I don't know what. There was some discussion about us starting late. It's 100% my fault. Somebody said a wizard is never late nor early, and there was a response said Ben is more of a socialist Tom Bombadil. I don't really know what that means, but that's all right. I mean, I do vaguely remember the Tom Bombadil part of Fellowship of the Ring, and I always thought it was like probably a good cut for the movie. Those things were already way too long.
We do our best,
Fair enough. Well, let's set this up. So we've got we're gonna watch Stormin Norman Finkelstein.
Is that yours?
No, I think I stole that from one of the regulars in the chat. But we have him debating Benny Morris, who, for people who aren't familiar with him, is a Israeli historian, and certainly an apologist for the current Israeli government. But one of the interesting things about Benny Morris is, so anyone who watched the debate that I did that we aired, on Monday with Walter Block, I actually brought up Benny Morris in that context because in a certain way I find him incredibly useful because as a historian, he did all this stuff that debunked, sort of classic Zionist propaganda about the war in 1948. And he's like a particularly good person to point to towards this, because it's like, hey, clearly this guy isn't a biased leftist, because, I mean, as far as I can tell, his view is they should have done more, right? I mean, he's so far to the right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. I guess I would say that, as he's gotten older, he just seems to get crazier and crazier. I don't know. I haven't read his books in probably 7 or 8 years, but I still read his articles once in a while. And, I feel like he's a main proponent of nuking Iran. He's
right,
called
right.
that, probably the most credible person who's called for that.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe not, but yeah.
I mean, if he's actually come out and said that he might be.
Yeah, or at least it's easily be interpreted that way, at least. But this is an interesting debate too, because my understanding is there's been a long-standing debate in letters between them for decades, between Finkelstein and Morris. I first read that, I think, in Finkelstein's book, Image and Reality.
Okay.
Which is one of his first seminal texts on the topic. And so it's just and I think Morris has responded to some of the critiques in there over the years, some of which you pointed to, the conclusions seem very much separate from the research and the reporting.
Right.
But so, yeah, it's interesting that I feel like this has come to a head for many decades, and then they did finally meet face to face, but I feel like destiny was there and kind of in the way a little bit, I would have rather just seen them hash this out finally, in some ways. And you kind of get that get that here. So I feel like I don't know why
Yeah,
it's so long, but I don't know that they've just like debated one-on-one in this type of format ever before, which is interesting.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so yeah, I thought this would be good to. I mean, you brought this debate to my attention, but I thought it'd be good to watch for a couple reasons. One of them is, I can't do a post game tonight. I've got a thing like right after this, so the whole thing is only like 46 minutes long, so we should be able to do it in just the main show. But yeah, I've seen. I've actually got to admit, despite being a well-known debate freak, I have never actually, set aside the 10 hours or whatever to watch the Lex Friedman, Morris, Finkelstein, Rabbani.
No, it's good. You'd like it. Yeah.
I'm sure. I just, it's just really hard to, it's just really hard to imagine
It's sort of cathartic,
setting aside the time to do all that. But certainly the clips that I saw, I mean, it's Destiny approaching debates the way that he does, and Norm, obviously, having like the kind of edge that he does when it comes to stuff like this. Like, I think like the combination of the two of them, right, was kind of the most like attention grabbing thing going on there. So it does seem like I could actually like reasonably watch this one in the evening, but B, like this seems like it might even be less entertaining maybe, but more informative.
Yeah. I think my favorite moment in that debate was Norm had been like throughout the debate, and actually even like in interviews before the debate with other people, like publicly accusing Destiny of getting all of his information off of Wikipedia.
Yes.
And this goes on for like a while until finally Destiny is just like, you know what? It's actually like a really good website. So
Yeah.
it's like a pretty great web. Just admits it,
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I mean, look, I actually think Wikipedia is a really great website. I mean, it's like
Yeah, sure.
publicly available, not for profit, just a absurd amount of information on it. I think it has a lot of virtues, but also like, you should, I think it's a good way to satisfy casual curiosity. You should actually get around to reading some books at some point.
And also, what's the point of citing Wikipedia? Like what special expertise do you have if that's what you're going to do?
Well, no, you don't have expertise. I mean, like, you have like
or even special interests, to go onto a podcast and just quote Wikipedia,
yeah,
you could save us all a lot of time by just like,
right. We could just read that ourselves. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started. So I think this is cued to start just before, so because he has Naftali Bennett on in the first part, and then he brings on Morris and Norm for the second. Yeah, this is actually also maybe something that's worth taking just a second on before we start. That like I find the latest incarnation of Piers Morgan kind of interesting, just in that, like, in a way, I mean, I guess it's sort of more highbrow, but like, in a way, it kind of like there's like a
Buckley.
Yeah, well, it's like a weird combination of, it's like, it feels like what Piers Morgan does now is like the bastard child of William F. Buckley's version of Firing Line and the Jerry Springer Show, or like, Geraldo, like, back in the era when like somebody like one of the guests punched him on air and all that.
Jerry Springer, dude.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, holy shit, dude. That's a great description. I also think it's interesting, like Piers seems to like agree a little bit more with Morris, but like Finkelstein as a person a little bit more. It's just like a dynamic I find not just with Morris, but like kind of every time Norm comes on, he's pretty clear that he definitely or he seems to be clear that maybe he's just being partial, not telling us what he thinks, but he seems to be, pushing back on a lot of what Norm says.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like
He seems to really he stands up for him when he's genuinely being interrupted in ways that I think a lot of other right-leaning hosts would just let him get steamrolled.
Fair enough. Well, let's give it a watch.
Now, to put this into perspective, return to Uncensored, the political scientist Professor Norman Finkelstein and Israel's preeminent historian Benny Morris. Welcome to both of you. Let me ask you first of all, Norman. Well, thank you. I'm glad we brought you two together. I've got to say, a lot of people have been asking us to do this for a long time, to bring you two together. You're both very eminent historians, obviously with different perspectives on this whole conflict, which goes back to, well, decades and decades and decades, as we know. I want to start, if I may, by talking about this situation with Iran. We've just heard from Naftali Bennett there, Norman, his perspective on the fact that Iran wants to eradicate Israel and is using all its proxies to try and do this, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. That appears to be unquestionable. Do you question that premise? I mean, do you have any doubt that Iran is involved in a multi-tentacled approach of trying to destabilize and eliminate Israel?
It's hard to begin with a starting point, because unless you know the starting point, you can't understand what follows. But let me begin with a book that Benny Morris himself wrote. It's called Israel's Border Wars, and I highly recommend it. It's an excellent book, and it goes back to the early 1950s. At that time, the Hitler was not Iran or the Ayatollah. The Hitler back then was a fellow named Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. He was an Arab nationalist, and Israel from early on was determined to topple him, not because he was carrying on any aggressive activity against the state of Israel. As Benny Morris documents quite exhaustively, in the early years of Nasser's regime, he was focused on internal development, not on the state of Israel. But Israel always feared, and it fears to this day, that an Arab leader might modernize the state and become a threat to Israeli regional hegemony. And so from early on, as Benny Morris exhaustively documents, Israel kept provoking Nasser, until in February 1955, they carried out a major military raid, killed about 50 or 60, Professor Morris can correct me, Egyptian soldiers, and that slowly escalated until the 1956 Israeli, British, French invasion of Egypt. Now, there are two lessons to be learned. Number one, it had nothing whatsoever, the war had nothing whatsoever to do with Nasser's aggressive, belligerent, Hitler-like assaults on Israel. It had to do with the fear of a modernizing Egypt. That's the first lesson to be learned. The second lesson to be learned is, once Israel has a country in its crosshairs, you cannot stop it. It will keep escalating and escalating and escalating the provocations until the country is forced to react. And then once it reacts, Israel unleashes, in the case of 1956, it was together with the UK and France, unleashes its full force. That same pattern, you saw it in 1982, when Israel kept escalating and escalating the attacks, on Lebanon until the PLO was forced to react. Israel invaded, including Benny Morris, who was a soldier during that war, committed the most horrible atrocities and killed, the estimates run, between 15 and 20,000 Lebanese and Palestinians, overwhelmingly civilians. The same pattern happened in 2008. There was a ceasefire in Gaza. It was agreed to in June. Israel decided it wanted to attack Hamas.
Do we really need this
and
distorted lecture about history?
Mr. Morris, you are not the moderator. Piers Morgan is the moderator. When he tells me to stop, I will
he's
be
allowing you
respectful
to
and
tell
stop.
people a distorted story.
Okay.
He shouldn't allow you to lecture with such distortions, supposedly based on my books.
Here's what I'll say, Benny Morris. Here's what I'll say. I will absolutely give you the exact same amount of time to respond to everything that Norman is saying. I can guarantee you that. But let him just finish his point.
Okay.
Okay. The same thing happened in 2008. There was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. The ceasefire was holding up. Israel decided it wanted to attack Hamas and Gaza. And so on November 4th, the day Barack Obama was elected president, when there was the distraction of the American election, the U.S. on November 4th attacked Hamas, killed several of its militants, and that quickly spiraled into the Operation Cast Lead that began on December 26, 2008. And the same thing is now happening in Iran. Iran is now in the position where Israel will keep ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up the assassinations and the provocations until Iran is forced to react.
Okay, let me go to Benny Morris, because I mean, look, I would have issue with, I certainly have a big issue with the conclusion there, because it seems to me, Benny Morris, that the ratcheting up has been going on from the Iranian side. But I'll let you respond to what Norman Finkelstein just said.
Okay, I'm not going to give a lecture in history here, but Norman supposedly is basing himself on my books, and my books don't actually tell the story Norman says give. Just one or two words about the past. Nasser unleashed, allowed in the beginning, and then later organized and unleashed terrorism against Israel. He received Soviet weaponry with which to confront Israel, and Israel felt itself forced to retaliate, to preempt him, and they went into the 1956 war in alliance with Britain and France. But I won't go into the history. Listen, the main problem now isn't Nasser 60 or 70 years ago. The problem is Iran. And Iran has had a policy since the Islamic regime took over under Khomeini, and announced as well by his successor, Khamenei, still the supreme leader, to destroy Israel. That's their policy. They announce it day in, day out, not just the leaders, but the generals. Everybody around power there says the same thing. Israel must be destroyed. And they want it destroyed because they are an Islamic regime. They are anti-Semites, and they want to dominate the Middle East. And they see Israel as sort of a promontory of the West in the Middle East, as an enemy they have to overcome before eventually attacking the West itself. That's the bottom line for them. Iran for decades has been building up these proxy forces, especially with rockets, especially the Hezbollah and the Hamas. And the Hamas has been rocketing Israel for the last 2 decades. And Israel, I think, has been extremely restrained, both in relation to the Hamas and in relation to the Hezbollah, but especially, and here I think Netanyahu has been ruling Israel for about the past 15 years, has been over-restrained, if you like, weak-kneed, even cowardly, and not confronting Iran much earlier. At the moment, the Iranians are threatening revenge against Israel. The Hezbollah is threatening revenge against Israel for knocking out several of the leaders of these proxy forces, which I think Israel has every right to do and to have done. Maybe a major confrontation is on the cards between Israel and Iran. The major problem for Israel, incidentally, hasn't been mentioned, not by Norman or yourself, and that is that Iran not just wants to destroy Israel, but is busy building or trying to build nuclear weapons in order to destroy Israel. And Israel should have taken these nuclear installations out before the Iranians approached a weaponization, and didn't do so, and perhaps will hopefully, if there is a major clash with Iran, will do so now and use the opportunity to destroy the nuclear installations which they built in order to weaponize and build nuclear weapons. The problem is for Israel is that Israel may not have the capability to do it by itself. It may be able to damage, but it may not be able to actually destroy the Iranian nuclear project. And for that, it probably needs American help. And American presidents have been very reluctant, like Netanyahu, to confront the Iranians, and so far haven't done anything except talk about not allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons, but haven't actually done anything to stop the Iranians.
Okay, before I go to Norman to respond to that, can I just ask you, Benny Morris, does Israel have nuclear weapons?
I don't know. I've never been invited to Dimona or wherever they stockpile them, so I don't know. But most Western intelligence agencies says Israel has a nuclear stockpile. They say Israel has at least 200 nuclear weapons, and I assume they know what they're talking about.
But we know exactly how many nuclear weapons the United States has, Russia has, China has, the UK has. Why is it the world has no idea how many Israel has? And why is it when I asked Netanyahu directly that question, he refused to answer?
Because Israel has always had a policy of ambiguity in relation to the nuclear weapons. Israel believed that so long as it didn't announce that it possesses nuclear weapons, it wouldn't provoke other countries around to try and possess them themselves. Ambiguity was seen as the best policy. I'm not sure that was right, but that was Israeli policy.
Okay.
But I think the world,
Right.
as I said, does know that Israel does possess these weapons.
But it does. But Norman Finkelstein, it is odd, isn't it, that we just don't know? I mean, there's Benny Morris sort of casually saying that it may have as many as 200 nuclear weapons. I've certainly never heard that from any member of the Israeli government. They refuse to even acknowledge they have one.
Well, Benny Morris is an odd bird. I'm using a euphemism there because he says one thing and then he says another thing. He's like Quicksilver. It's very hard to pin him down. So I won't go back to 1950. I won't go back to the early 50s. People can read the book, Israel's Border Wars. I read it 3 times, so I think I know it pretty well. And people can decide for themselves. Let's move to what Benny Morris just had to say. Benny Morris has, since 2008, that's the earliest date I've noticed, every 2 years he publishes an op-ed in some Western newspaper and sometimes in the Israeli newspapers, calling for an Israeli attack on Iran. Now, Benny Morris now says, we don't know whether Israel has nuclear weapons. Well, that's a very odd thing for him to say, because Benny Morris has been explicitly blackmailing the West since 2008, saying, if you don't, meaning the United States, if the US doesn't join in an attack on Iran, we, meaning Israel, have no alternative except to use non-conventional, that is to say, nuclear weapons. So, if I can quote him now, it is doubtful that its conventional capabilities will be sufficient to destroy the Iranian nuclear project. Then, non-conventional weaponry will have to be used to stymie the project. And many innocent Iranians will die. But the Iranians will have brought this upon themselves by bringing to power and leaving in power a leadership that will have forced Israelis to do what was necessary in order to survive. So, Benny Morris, who doesn't know whether Israel possesses nuclear weapons, nonetheless says Israel will have to use non-conventional weapons, and he says many Iranians will have to die, maybe millions, maybe tens of millions, but they deserved it because that's what he said. Mr. Morris, you can laugh till kingdom come, but I'm quoting your words. But he said that's okay because they voted for the regime.
No, this is absurd. This is absurd. I said
no,
Israel.
No.
And then let me respond.
Hang on. Norman, I think Benny Morris should be able to respond to your direct charge there, because you accused him of laughing at it.
I didn't charge anything. I quoted him.
All right, there are no obvious stopping points here, but we've watched a good amount of the exchange. Initial thoughts? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious thing is just that Morris is very calmly and soberly arguing for, U.S. involved, not just backed, but like U.S. involved war with Iran. I mean, it's not the first time he's definitely said this over the years. The exchange that's about to happen is pretty interesting, but also just want to say at one point I was definitely laughing at a really inappropriate moment because someone said in the chat that Norm's resting face is
yeah, it was like your girlfriend's dad when you have to tell him that you digged his car and also the gas is empty. Yes. Yeah, that definitely captures something. Yeah,
but
I mean,
it's terrifying listening to this guy talk.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, one thing that okay, so I do like, going back to what we were saying earlier about Piers Morgan. I do like that he gave Norm so much time to lay out the history. Not a lot of hosts for stuff like this would do that. I think that on the nuclear issue, it's first thought is the idea that you'd have strategic ambiguity, not about whether you would use them, right? I can understand that, right? But that you would have strategic ambiguity about whether you had nukes seems really strange to me. Because is it the entire any justification? I mean, any standard conventional justification for even having these weapons is all about their deterrent value, right? So it's they can't be a deterrent if people don't know you have them. I mean, it's
but not only that, but this idea that that if you're worried about people attacking you because you got nuclear weapons, which is let's just take what he's saying there, how is it a bunch of countries who is all right, they don't have nuclear weapons, they don't have nuclear weapons, they don't have nuclear weapons, and then all of a sudden you're all right, hey, listen, we might have them.
Yeah, I mean, surely ambiguity would be enough to give your enemies all the incentives they would need to actually get some, right? But and it's also funny that it's okay, I mean, aren't these the same people who've been every 6 months for the last 25 years have been saying Iran is 6 months away from developing a nuke? So it's clearly they don't think the strategic ambiguity is working. But also, I don't know, it reminds me of that scene in Dr. Strangelove where the Soviet ambassador talks about the terrifying new super nuke that they have that can't be called back, what's been triggered and all that, and the American president says, why would you develop this and not tell anybody, right? Yeah. And it's the chairman was going to announce it at the party congress on Monday. You know how we love surprises, right? It's just sort of insane on its face, right? It's it doesn't make sense in its own terms. And yeah, so anyway, whatever. I mean, that's not even the biggest deal, going on here, but it's just a really, really strange thing to do. But
said that the United States and I guess he said Netanyahu also in a more general sense, but he said the United States had done nothing to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, but people, including Benny Morris, like far right supporters of Israel, were pressuring the Obama administration to be tougher on Iran and to even attack Iran in some cases, and they felt sort of like ignored and embarrassed by it, because Obama wanted to, like, I'm no fan of Obama,
Sure.
but like the greater priority was passing the Iran nuclear deal. And like, you might not agree with the Iran nuclear deal, you might like, but to
It
say
did
that
actually work.
they
Like,
didn't do anything. Yeah,
yeah,
like I certainly think it's definitely better to have than not, at least, right? You know, but
yeah,
to,
no question. I mean,
even if
this,
you think it wasn't, right? To say they did nothing except like a few sentences about how they shouldn't, like that was a many years long negotiations, and basically like the only, not basically, like probably the only meaningful anti-nuclear action that the Obama administration was able to pass after starting out being pretty full-throated anti-nuclear.
yeah,
Like the
yeah, no,
same.
I mean, the Iran deal was great. I mean, it was. I mean, I think that it's kind of amazing now that at the time, and don't get me wrong, I still think in a better world, he would be, in a cell somewhere underneath the Hague, but it's like at the time, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I used to call Obama President Drone, right? But and it's not like those criticisms weren't absolutely correct, but also compared to the last two presidents, it's like, man, I missed the Obama foreign policy, by comparison in a lot of ways, right? Like, you know, that he did the detente with Iran, and the opening to Cuba. Um, nobody remembers this because it kind of doesn't serve the narrative of either side, but you know, Obama refused to ship heavy weaponry to Ukraine because he said it'd be too escalatory. Like that was actually a big Republican criticism of him at the time, that he was like too soft on Putin, because he wouldn't do that. He didn't attack Syria when a lot of people were, pressuring him to do it. Right. It's like, yeah, he also did a lot of horrible things. Don't get me wrong. Right. But yeah, neither Trump nor Biden showed anything like that level of restraint, that Obama
And
did.
also just like taking Morris's specific claim that for all these years nobody was doing anything. Like he's talking about the years where they were working on the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah.
Those are the years he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and clearly, like, again, clearly it worked, but also, like, okay, why? This is always the crazy thing to me. I mean, again, going back to the Walter Block debate, whenever people do these like hypotheticals, like, oh, what if Canada, attack the U.S., then when whatever, like, we're always putting ourselves in the Israelis' shoes in these conversations, and so it's like, okay, Israel thought it'd be good to have this nuclear deterrent, and then kind of sort of keep it a secret, although an open secret for some reason.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you can understand that, but it's like, okay, well, look, I mean, I want as few countries as possible to have nukes, because the more that have them, the greater the danger is that we actually have a nuclear war someday. But if we're playing this game, it's like, okay, I mean, Iran doesn't have an understandable need for a nuclear deterrent. Like, I mean, it seems like they're, if anything, I mean, they're in much greater danger of actually being invaded.
They can't just have one.
Yeah, right. They can't have one, right? We just heard Israel has maybe 200, although nobody officially knows. Yeah. And like this idea, like the premise of like U.S. and Israeli policy, foreign policy discussions about Iran, getting a nuke is always, if they got a nuke, it's like the second they got one, right, they've been nuking Israel. And it's always like, well, hold on. Why would that be? Because if, I mean, I understand, right? I mean, Iran is, like Iran definitely funds various armed factions that are fighting with Israel and, arms them. That's true, right? But like, you'll notice that they haven't, like directly attacked Israel with the Iranian military, for about the same reason that the US and the Soviet Union didn't directly attack each other, right? Like, and that's even without Iran having, nukes of its own, right? Like that if they were, because if you're going to say, if Iran had a nuke, they would nuke Israel, then you're saying that, the Iranian government, would just be eager to commit national suicide in that case, right? Like have a nuclear exchange, right? Like, but hold on, if they were going to commit national suicide, why not do it with the regular army? I mean, it just like why is it that they've never, right? Like, yeah, like why is it that decades and decades and decades have passed, right, without Iran, actually directly going to war with Israel? And in fact, even after Israel bombed their embassy, and yeah, I understand the party line is, well, technically it wasn't an embassy, it was a Iranian government building that was like next door to the official embassy within the same. It's like, yeah, nobody would be making these nuanced distinctions if it were an American embassy, right? That's like after, even after Israel bombed their embassy, right? I mean, like the Iranian response was super restrained. Like in general, the pattern has been that like once they feel like, okay, they're going to just like look really bad if they don't respond at all, right? It's like when they do a response, it tends to be like, okay, we're going to send our slowest drones and give you 72 hours warning so we can like officially respond, right? We say we didn't just sit down and take it, we responded, but also, Jesus Christ, we don't want to start a war.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I brought, speaking of Walter Block, I brought my
you brought some
nicotine vape in my weed vape.
Yeah. Okay, good. That'll be useful if there are any if there's any like morally horrifying things that you want to justify on the fly. That makes it go down a little easier if you've got the visual aids.
US over here working on the Iran deal. Israel over here super stoned, encouraging that we bomb Iran.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
I quoted.
No, you said he was laughing about this. Let me go to Benny Morris to explain what he was doing.
As is your want, you didn't quote me properly. What I said was that if Israel is unable with conventional weapons to destroy the Iranian project, and if the Americans don't do it in conjunction with Israel or by themselves, Israel will be forced to use non-conventional weapons and attack the nuclear installations. Not kill millions of Iranians. No. You said millions of Iranians. I've never said anything. I have never said anything about millions of Iranians. This is pure nonsense. This is pure. Norman, you are lying. You are lying.
What do you think happens
Norman,
if you drop?
You are lying.
Professor Morris, what do you think happens if you drop nuclear weapons on Iran? What do you think happens?
No, not on Iran. Not on Iran. You're again. Norman, you are misquoting.
You, Professor
I said
Morris,
Israel should use Israel. Would you let me finish telling you?
We can't work out who's saying what. So, Benny Morris, why don't you say what you believe you said?
Not just what I believe, but what I actually said. I said Israel should, if it is unable to do that work and destroy the Iranian nuclear project before they get nuclear weapons with conventional weaponry, we will have to use non-conventional weaponry. And what was meant by that...
So my question for you... Okay, so my question for you...
Let me finish the sentence.
Yeah, but...
Well, let me just finish my sentence.
You have to...
What I meant by that is...
You have to accept when you say that, don't you? All right.
No.
Let me I'll come back with the question.
That Israel should use tactical nuclear weapons to destroy the Iranian nuclear plants, not bomb Iranian cities, not bomb the Iranian civilian population. But tactical nuclear weapons could do the job against the nuclear installations in Iran.
Okay, Norman Finkelstein. So he's clarified he doesn't mean dropping big nuclear weapons into civilian areas. He's talking about
well,
using tactical
Professor
nuclear weapons to eliminate nuclear plants. What do you say to that?
What I say to that is actually quite simple. For many, many years, there has been the advocacy of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. In case your listeners are unaware, there's a nuclear weapon-free zone in Latin America. There's a nuclear weapons-free zone in Africa. There's a nuclear weapons-free zone in the South Pacific. And there has been a strong advocacy because of the dangers of a nuclear war in the Middle East to turn the Middle East into a nuclear weapons-free zone. The last vote was taken in the UN General Assembly in December 2022. It was a very close vote, very close. The vote was 175 states, including Iran, in favor of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, 1 against Israel, and 2 abstentions, Singapore and the United States. So I think there's a very real danger of a nuclear escalation in the Middle East because Israel is, as the New York Times called it this past week, they called Israel a rogue state. That's the euphemism for a lunatic state. Israel is a lunatic state. It has Iran in its crosshairs. It's determined to escalate, ratchet up the provocations until it could force the U.S. into the war with Iran, or in Benny Morris's alternative, to use nuclear weapons, non-conventional weapons in Iran. So at this point, I think I can't speak for the immediate future because it may be too late. But certainly the prospect of a nuclear weapons-free Middle East would, I think, be the best option. The entire world supports it, except Israel. That's what the vote shows.
Can I say something now?
Okay, but
Can I say
yes,
something?
you can. But Benny Morris, your chance to respond.
Yeah, I actually agree with Norman that the Middle East should be and should become a nuclear-free zone. The problem is that assuring that Iran would abide by anything it committed itself to would be a real problem. Iran has cheated every UN body which has looked at its nuclear project. It's cheated about almost everything it does. It's a regime of lies which one cannot expect to tell the truth. And therefore, Israel can't depend on a promise by Iran that it won't develop nuclear weapons when Iran is so big it could do it in a dark corner somewhere in any corner of Iran and get away with it. So Israel is probably not going to demilitarize in terms of nuclear weapons on the say-so of Iran. But the whole idea of a rogue state, I don't remember reading anything in the New York Times about calling Israel a rogue state. But if there is a rogue state, let me finish. But if there is a rogue state in the Middle East, it's definitely Iran, at least in the eyes of most Western governments and intelligence services, because Iran has been a producer and creator and propagator and promoter of terrorism, and everything it does in connection with North Korea, in connection with Russia, in connection with every awful regime in this planet, to prove that it is a rogue state. There is one rogue state, one pariah state, and hopefully its regime will vanish in the near future.
Okay, Norman Finkelstein, let me just ask, I mean, you seem
I would like to just
hang on, let me just put a question. I want to put a question to you, and then you can comment as you want.
One brief comment.
I'm genuine. Hang on, let me just put you can respond, Norman. Let me put it. I'm allowed to ask questions. So let me just ask a question. You do seem oddly keen to defend Iran, to paint a picture of this poor country which is being constantly provoked and therefore has no option but to do what it does in terms of helping proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah and so on. Why are you so defensive of Iran when really most independent people who've looked at the situation, they may have just as many criticisms as you do of Israel and the way its government has been behaving, but nobody races to defend Iran. Why are you so keen to defend them?
I look at the documentary record, I look at the historical record, and I base my judgments on it. Let's just take the last point that Benny Morris made, and then I'll return to your major point. The last point Benny Morris made, for a surprising change, we agreed on the point. He said he too supports a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. However, he said that we can't trust Iran, that it's a conniving, cheating, deceptive, and so forth regime. So we can't trust it that it won't build a nuclear weapon. Now, I find that coming from an Israeli a very odd statement, because Professor Morris must know that it was through deception, conniving, deceiving, espionage, spying, and all sorts of other things that Israel created its nuclear weapons force. He has for sure read Avner Cohen's book on how the bomb was created, how Israel acquired nuclear weapons. Professor Morris, according to Avner Cohen, was it by being honest? Was it by being above board? Was it by allowing inspectors to see what Israel was doing in Dimona? Is that what happened, Professor Morris? So isn't this a classic case of the kettle calling the coffee pot black? For you to say we can't trust Iran after Israel's record on nuclear weapons, as even you so shamefacedly and shamelessly say, I don't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. You really don't? You advocate Israel's use of them in the event that the US doesn't join the attack on Iran, but then you don't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. You're such a shameless liar, which is a sad fact. I spent many a week reading your books. I spent many a month reading your books, and to see how you have degenerated into a state propagandist and a bold-faced liar.
No,
very
this is
sad.
absurd.
Very sad.
All right, Benny
Piers-
Morris. Okay, we're going to
Piers,
make
this
it.
is-
Look, some incendiary comments there about Benny Morris. Benny Morris, defend yourself.
I don't think I'm shameless. I think I've written truthful books about the history. That's why Norman quotes me all the time. About the nuclear weapons, my assumption is Israel has them, but I've never seen them. I've never seen it confirmed by Israel that it has them. So it's sort of up in the air, but we can assume it has them. Why does Israel have nuclear weapons? Well, Norman actually understands.
I never saw the Roman Empire.
No, Norman, let me finish. Norman actually knows why Israel, if it has nuclear weapons, developed them in the 1950s and 60s. And that was because it was surrounded by a bunch of Arab countries which wanted to destroy it. They said, we will destroy you. We want to destroy Israel. So Israel was forced to build a nuclear stockpile so it would be able to deter the Arabs should they be able conventionally to overcome Israel. Israel managed to do that, never threatened anybody with use of nuclear weapons, never used them against anybody, even when its army was on its knees at the beginning of the 1973 war. It never threatened anybody with destruction like Iran does. It never threatened anybody like Hamas and the Hezbollah do daily, calling for Israel's destruction. But it did need this nuclear deterrent to stave off animals like the Iranian the Iranian government.
All right. So I was just curious because, there was a point in all of that when Norm said Benny Morris, sort of periodically writes these op-eds advocating nuking Iran, and which would obviously kill millions of people, but he but like he says, if it happened, that it would be, Iran's own fault, etc. Morris says, no, that's not true, because I never said anything about millions of people. And Norm's response there is kind of the obvious one. That's like, okay, well, hold on. What do you think happens when, a nuclear weapon is dropped on a country? And then it seemed like his response was, oh, well, it wouldn't be, it would just be a little nuke, it would just be a tactical nuke. And it wouldn't be, just hardly a nuke at all. And it wouldn't be dropped on a major civilian population center. So, so it wouldn't really kill millions of people. And I don't know. I'm curious about this. I'm certainly not an expert, but I did look up, do a quick search on this, which, I'm being a hypocrite here, because I always hate it when people look stuff up on air, because like
I know a little bit about this,
because you can't, like, anytime you're looking something up on air, like all you can really report on is like the first 10 seconds of like your, whatever knowledge that gets you, which might end up being incredibly misleading. So I did find one thing that looks relevant though, so I will say it, but I think you might actually know something about this. So please.
Oh yeah, well, I would just say that, like, I do have sort of an obsession reading about nuclear weapons and stuff, but these tactical nukes were, to my knowledge, first introduced to the U.S. arsenal in when Obama upgraded the nuclear arsenal. It was part of the, like, I think it was $1 trillion upgrade to the nuclear arsenal, and even like very mainstream moderate sources like NPR and the New York Times and, like, whoever you want, point out that, like, there are concerns that the tactical nukes are precisely more concerning strategically in a way, because they're more tempting for actors to use them. And even though they're tactical nukes, like, they're still designed to take out like a particular battle zone. Like, you could still take out a whole, like, significant a whole significant area with a tactical nuclear weapon. And if you're striking a nuclear facility with a nuclear weapon, I mean, like, who the fuck knows? Like,
that's like how many people are going to die after you do that. Gempt in the chat says tactical nuke is something like 1 to 100 kilotons. It's not really a defined term.
So that's the other thing, is like nowadays, like, the standard nukes are like they're tipped with multiple nukes on them, and like each of those is the size of like one of the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima. I can't remember exactly which nuclear weapon that is, but it's not like our biggest one. It might be nuclear tipped ICBMs, but I could be wrong about that. But they have several bombs on them.
So I looked at the National Institute of Health. Says we've developed the tools for calculating deaths and injuries due to blast thermal effects and local fallout from hypothetical nuclear attacks on the United States. And their estimate, and this is the United States, not Iran, right? So I mean, you have to keep that in mind. Might make a very large difference one way or the other, but they say this table indicates that more than 10 million deaths could result even from limited attacks, even if the targets were industrial and military and not population per se, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think that the idea that, I mean, again, saw Presto Besto in the chat was saying, oh, Morris didn't really advocate nuclear Iran. No, he directly did just now, not even in the op-ed, but like in the debate just now. He said, he was advocating that, that if they can't do it, with conventional weapons, right, then Israel should nuke Iran. He's just advocating that they only use the small nukes, right, the tactical nukes.
Which is interesting too.
Like the small nukes, right? I mean, just from like the radiation fallout, etc. Like they have look, there's a reason that if there was a small nuke that went off in the United States, you would think that was a very big deal, right? Like let's just put it that way.
Oh yeah, totally. Also, it's amazing how like I don't know if other people in the audience experienced this, but when I was first watching this, I expected Benny Morris, like he put so much effort into trying to interrupt by being like he's misquoting me, that's not what I said, that you sort of have to expect that he's going to be like, I never said we should use nuclear weapons, right? Like that's the level of opposition he's putting up to Norm just saying that he said that. And then
yeah, Presto,
all
you
of
can't.
that.
Presto says no. He advocated for nuclear weapons against facilities. Yeah, you can't start the sentence with no if the rest of the sentence verifies what was said, right? Like that is advocated nuclear Iran. That's literally what that means. You're saying he only advocated using small nukes, but it's nevertheless the case that he advocated nuclear Iran. And again, I mean, if like imagine that a tactical nuke, you know, somehow, I don't know how this would happen, but somehow or another, Al Qaeda, you know, managed to get a tactical nuke, you know, somewhere in the United States. No matter how small and tactical, right? Like that we would experience this. I mean, this is, I cannot even imagine what the response to that would be, right? Like literally, I don't think I could imagine that, right? Like that would be like, you know, I mean, people would always do like what, you know, I remember Crystal Ball would call 9/11 math after 10/7, right? Trying to estimate how many 9/11s something counts as, right? You know, but like, I cannot even imagine how many 9/11s worth of response that, you know, that would have gotten, right? You know, because it's like, yeah, because that's, if you're going to be the first country that's been nuked since 1945, you know, I mean, the so-called tactical nuke could still kill, you know, vast numbers of people, both immediately and long term. But like, but you know, but B, I mean, this is you don't have an all-out war before that. I mean, there's certainly no way that you can, you know, you're not going to after that, right? I mean, this is like the idea that there's a country that's going to be nuked and not, you know, respond in a way that's going to mean there's all-out war is just like obviously not how anything ever could work anywhere.
Yeah, it might be the end. You know,
Yeah.
might be it. I mean, yeah, but yeah, that's precisely the concern with the tactical nuclear weapons is they're more tempting to use for the governments that are thinking about using them, but the countries that get hit with them are likely to be like, you know, you just dropped a nuke on us. Understand? So, yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
Okay. Norman?
I think at this point, people have heard both sides, so I'd rather you move on to another question if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's move. I tell you what I want to move on to. I want to move on to the current state of the war in Gaza. I want to ask you, first of all, Norman Finkelstein, where you think this war now is. Prime Minister Netanyahu seems determined to continue prosecuting the war until every last member of Hamas has been killed or presumably put in prison. But in the process, a lot more civilians are dying on a daily basis. How does this war end, do you think?
Well, I think we have to first get clear on the nomenclature. I don't believe it's a war. I actually think the actual, what you might call battlefield aspect of the conflict has been fairly trivial. I admit, I can't prove that, but I can say, having followed it fairly closely, that you don't read in Gaza, you don't read about any major battles in Gaza. You don't read about any major battlefield deaths in Gaza. What you hear is about a person here, a person there being killed, aside from the fact that since Israel is indiscriminately bombing Gaza with an unprecedented intensity, one can say with certainty large numbers of Hamas militants have been killed, but that's because large numbers of civilians have been killed. So you can guess, roughly speaking, the number of Hamas militants proportional to the population have been killed roughly in the same numbers as civilians killed. The main aim of the assault on Gaza, I think, having studied the record very closely, and here I think I've studied as closely as anyone else, it's properly described as a genocide in Gaza. I think the main aim in Gaza has been to, as many Israelis have said, to make Gaza unlivable, make Gaza uninhabitable. And so, as the former chief of the National Security Council, Giora Eiland, he's now an advisor to the defense minister, as he put it, the people of Gaza will have only two choices left: to stay and to starve, or to leave. And that's, in my opinion, why Israel launched the assault on Rafah beginning in early May 7th, I think, because they wanted to finish the job. They wanted for there to be nothing left in Gaza, so the people of Gaza will have nothing left to return to. And that aim has, in my opinion, been largely achieved. The last numbers I read are that there are 40 million tons of rubble in Gaza, and it would take between 10 and 15 years just to clean out the rubble. The rubble is mixed with a lot of unexploded ordnance and toxic substances. So the estimate is 10 to 15 years, not to rebuild Gaza, but not to rebuild
Okay,
Gaza,
I want to bring Benny in.
but just to remove the rubber. I want to just, okay, let's go. Move ahead.
Okay, let me bring Benny in. Benny, I want to read you a quote, Benny, before you respond. A quote from an interview you gave in 2014. You said, "There are circumstances in history that justify ethnic cleansing. I know this term is completely negative in the discourse of the 21st century, but when the choice is between ethnic cleansing and genocide, the annihilation of your people, I prefer ethnic cleansing." People think that what Israel is doing now in Gaza is a form of ethnic cleansing. Do you agree with that?
No, not really. I think Israel has been prosecuting a war against the Hamas since October 7th, because the Hamas attacked Israel, slaughtered 1,250 people, took hostage children, old people, women, 250 of them, raped women, raped apparently men as well. And Israel decided that this was enough and we must destroy this government decided we must destroy the Hamas, and that's what it's been doing for the last 9 months. And it's an organization which well deserves being destroyed. The organization, the Hamas fighters, 20, 30,000 of them have been hiding among the population, in the population, under the buildings, in the hospitals, in the schools, etc., etc. And this has necessitated Israel bombing here and there to kill Hamas people. And that's what it's been doing. And this has caused enormous, terrible damage in Gaza, and it will take years to rebuild Gaza, but it will be rebuilt. If the Hamas is destroyed. If it's not destroyed, there will be perpetual warfare between Israel and the Hamas, and the civilian population of the Gaza Strip will remain in miserable and terrible conditions. This, incidentally, was probably one of the aims of the Hamas when it initiated that assault on October 7th against Israel. It is anticipated that Israel would go into Gaza, would bomb Gaza, would kill lots of civilians, and then would, of course, be blamed for it by the international community and hounded by people like Norman Finkelstein intellectually. They expected that, and they probably wanted that, and they don't care about how many civilians die in Gaza because they all go to heaven according to the Hamas fundamentalist beliefs. So they're actually martyrs, so they shouldn't even complain about it. The Hamas built itself a large tunnel network under the Gaza Strip, some 700 kilometers worth of tunnels, which it never allowed civilians in the Gaza Strip to enter because it wanted the civilians to die outside.
All right, Norman Finkelstein. I mean, it's hard to. All I would say is,
may I respond?
It is hard to disagree when Benny Morris says that Hamas obviously knew what the response was going to be here. You can't go in to Israel and slaughter 1,200 people and wound nearly 7,000 more in the most grotesque, medieval, barbaric manner and not assume that Israel would respond in the way that it has. So you would surely agree with that Hamas must have known what was going to come back.
I'll address that question in a half moment. I would first like to address what Professor Morris had to say, and then I promise you I'll get back to that question. What Professor Morris says, Israel is attacking Hamas. Israel is focused on Hamas, and everything else is, to use the technical expression, it's collateral damage, regrettable, sad, but collateral damage. So let's take a report that came out today from B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories. And it documents in excruciating detail the massive, relentless torture that Israel is inflicting on the detainees since October 7th. Now, people worry justifiably about the torture that might be inflicted on the hostages in Gaza. But what about, according to B'Tselem, there are 10,000 detainees now who are being relentlessly, brutally tortured, including sexual torture, not just sexual violence, but beyond the generic sexual violence, sodomy and so forth. Was that targeting Hamas? Are all those 10,000 detainees who have been randomly collected by Israel, they're all Hamas? And let's assume it was Hamas.
Can I respond
and
to
let's
that?
assume.
Can I respond?
Wait, let's assume.
Wait 1 second, Benny. You will be in a minute, yes.
Piers, and let's assume that Hamas knew Israel would react. Now, I'm asking you a simple question, Piers. Do you think that does that justify Israel's infliction of massive torture on roughly now 10,000 Palestinian detainees from Gaza who were randomly rounded up since October 7th? Now, one last point, and then it's over to Professor Morris. Professor Morris wants us to believe that Israel is engaging in a pinpoint war against Hamas with collateral damage. He didn't use the expression collateral damage. I'm using it, but you get the point. So here's my question. I've spent the past 8 months reading through the human rights reports. I've read the reports of Save the Children. I've read the reports of UNICEF. I've read the reports of the World Food Program. I've read the reports of USAID. I've read the reports of the World Bank, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development.
Norman, you're reading much too much.
The World Health Organization. Now I ask you, Piers, is it plausible? Is it believable that all these internationally eminent and respected human rights organizations, when they say that Israel is targeting the civilian population of Gaza, is it plausible, Piers, that they are all conspiring in a monumental hoax to deny that Israel is, in fact, only targeting Hamas? Is that believable?
Well, no. Here's what I would say. Let me answer.
I'd like an answer.
I will come to Benny for an answer, but my response.
Answer?
Yes, you can, Benny. 1 moment. My response myself would be that you missed out a report that came out yesterday where the United Nations accepted that I think it was 8 or 9 members of its employees had been taking part on the attacks on October the 7th. So you didn't mention that report. So reports can be, multifaceted in what they reveal about what's going on here.
It's such a ridiculous non-response.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, also, I was thinking about this earlier. It's just like people often get away with these like exterminationist type statements of saying like, oh, we're just talking about killing everyone who's part of Hamas. It's not a genocide of the Palestinians, just everyone who's affiliated with Hamas. And I think the spectrum is so far on how people talk about this, to the right, that people don't realize that's a pretty crazy thing to say too. I mean, imagine if another country was like, everyone who's ever been affiliated with the U.S. Army or with the IDF, for that matter, everyone who ever served is a target now.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, if you were gonna, and I was thinking about this earlier when Benny Morris was talking about, members of Hamas, hiding, schools and hospitals and civilian apartments, whatever. It's like, yeah, look, if you were bombing the shit out of Tel Aviv and you wanted to make sure that every single person who had any sort of affiliation with the IDF was being killed, you could use that exact same rationale to bomb every single apartment, every single school, every single hospital, right? Because like if you left any out, right, you would almost certainly be not killing every single person who was affiliated in any way with the IDF.
On top of the fact that that's obviously as we know, like, not what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the figure that always seems most decisive to me is that 1.9 million people were forced to leave their homes, right? There's something insane like 86% of the buildings in Gaza had been at least damaged by bombs, and that was like several months ago. It's got to be way worse now that figure came from. So it's like, look, there's just, the math doesn't work on, we had to kick 1.9 million people out of their homes because we were trying to get to 30,000 Hamas fighters. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's like, it just, I mean, that's just insane on its face. But the thing that really gets me about, Piers's argument, because, it's been a little while since Benny Morris actually gave one. I mean, he just kind of heckles and says that he's being misrepresented, and then, kind of repeats what he said when it's his turn to talk again. So it's really mostly at this point, this is a debate between Norman and Piers Morgan, for this last little part anyway. And like the thing that really gets me about Piers's side of that debate says, oh, well, Hamas must have known what the Israeli response would be. It's like, okay, well, hold up. Why does that only go in one direction? I mean, fair enough as far as it goes, right? I mean, but like, why does it only go in one direction? Right? It's like, what, like, why is it that, this is like 2023 before October 7th was the biggest year on record for settler pogroms against Palestinians in the West Bank, often, with the, always with at least the indifference and often with the active, with the active aid of the Israeli army, right? There's that whole, like Ramallah to Jericho is a massive, massive area that was almost completely cleared of Palestinian inhabitants. At the same time, Netanyahu was going forward with the strategy of, regional normalization without the Palestinians to guarantee that the occupation could last forever. So it's like, I mean, surely when you do all that, you must know, right, that you're greatly increasing the chances of some big attack from
meanwhile, like bombing their civilian population every few years or months.
Yeah, I mean, like, and like now, right? It's like, why couldn't you say the same thing? Like, if there's some, unimaginably horrific event in Israel, in a year or two, which is, that's like, I don't know, October 7th times 10 or something. It's like, yeah, why couldn't a pro-Palestinian equivalent of Piers say exactly the same thing? It's like, well, look, surely Israel knew when they displaced 1.9 million people from their homes and, killed more children in a matter of months than had died in all the war zones in the world for 4 years beforehand, and, had some psychotic, unimaginable number of amputees, et cetera, et cetera. They must have known they were provoking a response. I mean, it's like, whatever legitimacy it has in that direction, it surely has in the other too.
Yeah, totally. And then, like, even if you believe what Piers Morgan is saying, that like this is what Hamas wanted, if you sincerely believe that, then like surely you're not the type of person who believes in like giving Hamas what they want, in most contexts,
which always gets me when people say, because I've heard this so many times now, right? Like I think I've I think Destiny might have said some version of this in my debate with him. I've definitely seen like a dozen other people say in debates. So many times people will say, oh, the reason that, like Hamas wants to, hide among civilians or something, in order that there be all these civilian deaths so that they'll have this great propaganda and it'll, it'll convince, useful idiots like Ben Burgis. Now I always just think it's like, okay, hold on. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that's true. Man, I could think of an easy way of not giving them what they want then, huh?
Yeah, that, and also there's these two ways that people make this argument, particularly but not limited to, as we just saw, human shielding. It's like there's two reasons that people claim Hamas uses human shielding. One is that it's a deterrent. So like the IDF will be less likely to fire on us if we have civilians around, which like if anyone knows that's not true, it's definitely Hamas, right?
Right.
And then the other reason people claim this happens is because, oh no, they actually want these people to be killed because of the reason you stated, that it's like great propaganda for them, which completely falls on the face of the first reason, right? Like they're not using the human shields at once hoping it'll
they're not actually using them as shields, right? Because like the accusation of like what it means to say that you're using somebody as a human shield is that you're using them to like deter people from attacking you. Like otherwise, what does the word shield mean there, right? So it's like what they're really saying is, okay, when we accuse them of human shielding, we don't really mean human shielding. We just mean like deliberately creating all these civilian deaths so Israel will look bad. And it's like, again, if so, why are you giving them what they want?
Right. And but the same people will claim that Hamas is using human shielding for both of those reasons, even though they can't be true at the same time, right? Like either you're using them because you think it'll make them less likely to fire on civilians, or or you're using them to maximize.
You want them to fire on civilians because then you'll have the exactly.
You can't claim Hamas wants both of those things,
right?
And each of them, they would know, whichever reason it is, it's not working. They would know that by this point. So, like the propaganda is not restraining Israel, and having civilians around is also not deterring them from firing on Hamas.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's keep watching.
I would say this. I would also say this. I would say that, as I said from the very start of this, after the scale of the attack on October the 7th, Israel didn't just have a right to defend itself; they had a moral duty to defend itself. It was the scale of proportionate response that was always, for me, the great moral quandary. How much is too much? And there's no doubt it's a particularly difficult war to propagate, because you have Hamas living amongst civilians in Gaza, and the civilian population is 50% under 18. This gives it an almost unique nature, this war, that we haven't seen anywhere else in the world. So it's very complicated. It's not easy. There's no simple answer. But to come to Benny Morris, I would say this, that the problem Israel has is that Netanyahu is utterly determined, it seems, to continue this war, fighting it until every last member of Hamas is eliminated. But this is clearly taking a lot longer than he anticipated. And in the process, many thousands more civilians are being killed. And public support around the world for Israel, outside of the US, has been dramatically reducing, to the point where Israel is becoming almost a pariah. And I just wonder how you feel about that, and whether there is a way through this which brings this to an end, which doesn't involve killing every last member of Hamas.
As far as I remember, Netanyahu said that he wants to get every one of those 3,000 Hamasniks who crossed the border and slaughtered Israelis, he wants to get them either on trial or kill them. I don't know if said he wants to kill every last Hamasnik, and there probably is no such thing, because every day, every week, every month, they probably recruit new fighters. So that's an impossibility. But it does want to destroy Hamas as a military and a governmental organization, and that's something I certainly identify with. I don't think that Norman is quoting correctly. I don't think that all the world's human rights organizations are saying that Israel targets civilians. I do believe that they say Israel has killed lots of civilians alongside Hamas people, and that's certainly true. But I don't really know what the way out of this is, unless Hamas gives up the hostages it still holds and agrees to disarm and to stop firing at Israel. Otherwise, this will go on until essentially the Hamas, as you say, every last one of them is killed, at least in Netanyahu's eyes. Just let me add one other thing. Netanyahu doesn't really represent the will of all Israelis, probably not even most Israelis at this stage. He's an incompetent, I think, cowardly and immoral leader. He's a corrupt politician. All he's really interested in, or mainly interested in, is saving his own skin and not going to jail on corruption charges, and to stay in control of the premiership. That's what he aims at. And prolonging the war seems to help him do this. So far, the Israeli public says, well, we'll have elections, but only after we finish the war with Hamas. But now it's all become very complicated, because it's not just the Hamas, it's the Hezbollah, and it's the Iranians, and it's the Houthis in Yemen Israel has to confront. So Hamas has actually been sidelined by recent events.
I would imagine that Norman Finkelstein would pretty much agree with everything you said about Netanyahu just then. And I always like to end these debates, which has been fascinating.
No.
That is the most Norm possible response there.
Yeah, just getting started with Netanyahu. I got a question for you. I feel like we probably agree on the answer to this, but I'd be interested. Do you think if Hamas was like, all right, we give up, we're going to give back the remaining hostages, you win? Like, do you think that would end this?
No.
No. Yeah,
No, I don't. I think that I think that if every single, I mean, look, and I want to be really clear on this, taking civilian hostages is a war crime, no matter who does it or in what war or for what reason, right? Like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, obviously, I think they should release hostages. Also, vice versa, right? If you put a fancy name on it, like detainees, to make it sound better, right? If you're in many cases just like holding random civilians without like accusing them of a crime, right? That's essentially the same war crime, right? That on a much larger scale, right? That's also bad. But yes, I think that if Hamas released every single hostage tomorrow, I think that Netanyahu would keep doing what he's doing. I think it would like, I think there might be as much as 45 minutes before they came up with a new, like a new justification, right? To like huddle together and do it. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but we still have to track down, but there are still people who are still alive who were among those 3,000 that, penetrated into Israel, we think. So we still need to track those down. And then the party line would become, well, this is on Hamas because they could stop the war anytime they wanted to if every single one of those people came forward and surrendered themselves to, to Israeli detention. That would be the new line, right? But I mean, Netanyahu certainly personally has all kinds of incentives to keep the war going, as lots of people have pointed out that he was, he was teetering on the edge of losing power and possibly ending up in jail, before the war started. And so I think it's personally, like it would be a disaster for him if it ended, which is why like absolutely everybody except for like State Department spokesman has been saying, yeah, like this ceasefire deal, Hamas signed off on it long ago, right? Like Netanyahu's the problem, right? He keeps, if it looks like there's too much danger of being signed off on, he goes back and includes poison pills. He shifts around, comes up with excuses. So I think that's true, but I also think that, look, I think on a broader ideological level, there's too much of the Israeli establishment that has always wanted this, right? To have an excuse to do, Nakba Part 2, at least in Gaza. And I think, increasingly it looks like the West Bank also, right? But certainly at least Gaza. I mean, like, if you assume that the end point, the end goal is for Hamas, for there to be zero like Hamas attacks in the future, then none of this makes sense, because, as Benny Morris himself admitted a minute ago, right, they're probably recruiting new people every day because of what's going on, right? He didn't say that last part, but because of what's going on, right? I'm sure this is a bonanza for Hamas recruitment. So that doesn't make any sense. But if you think the goal is to, depopulate Gaza of Palestinians, then all this makes perfect sense. I mean, this is like the vast majority of the population has been forced at gunpoint to leave their homes. As Norm was interrupted, as he was saying, it would take at least 15 years just to clear the rubble. And like there was like months ago, there was a UN estimate that it would take 80 years to actually rebuild from the destruction. So, I think, there's certainly members of Netanyahu's cabinet, and important ones, who will very openly say that the goal is to transfer the Palestinian population out of Gaza. And, in some cases, this is like the kind of thing these people have been advocating their entire political careers. And Netanyahu, has a more ambiguous posture than that. He won't quite come out and say that. But yeah, I think making it so unpalatable that you have massive numbers of people accepting, voluntary transfer, right? I mean, that's that would actually make sense of what's going on in the last 10 months in a way that, our only goal is to defeat Hamas. If Hamas disappeared, then of course we wouldn't do this. Just doesn't really make sense of the observable facts.
Yeah. I've got another question for you.
Yeah.
What do you think is more likely? Maybe this is not a fair question. That's
Sure.
a fair answer if it's not. But
Wow.
At some point, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump pulls any amount of support from Israel in weapons or money or whatever. I guess weapons, really. And or we go to war with Iran.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I have a really, really, really hard time imagining the first one happening, unfortunately. And,
Same.
Kamala has come right out and said she won't, repeatedly. And there's certainly nothing in her record that, would suggest that, and who's around her and all that. And she's been very explicit that she won't. And Biden and Trump has been running way to her right on this, right? I mean, he to the point that okay, a little over 2 months ago when there was that presidential debate, seems like much longer ago than that. Trump said, Trump was staking out such a hawkish line on Gaza that he said that Biden had become a Palestinian.
Yeah, a bad Palestinian.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a wonderful Trumpy flourish to add a bad Palestinian. He's become a Palestinian, not a good one. A bad one. Yeah, awesome.
Weak Palestinian.
Yeah, exactly. He said that Chuck Schumer had become a Palestinian. Right. And certainly Trump's record in office. I mean, Trump was the most aggressively pro-Israel president in American history. Nobody else came close. I mean, Trump,
which is saying a lot. Yeah,
was saying a lot, right?
Yeah.
But it's true, right? I mean, he came in. Israel always hated the Iran agreement. He tore that up right away. He
embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem.
Schumer applauded the next day.
but like also just like let's think about this for a second. When the 6-day war happened, right? So Israel took over, East Jerusalem, right, as part of the post 1967 occupation. When that happened, Lyndon Johnson was president, right? So, and yeah, okay. Even if we leave him out, that maybe I don't know when they did the official annexation of East Jerusalem, right? Like if that was still 67 or that was 68 already, but certainly since the official, unless it took a lot longer after 67 to do the official annexation that I think it did.
No,
right?
April through June, I think.
What?
I think it's April through June. I could be wrong. Yeah, I could be, yeah. Like, it might have still been quite a bit of the year left.
So, yeah. So, but like in any case, like from the 1967 war to Trump, right? That's the last little bit of LBJ being president, Nixon being president, Ford being president, Carter being president, Ronald Reagan being president, George H.W. Bush being president, Clinton being president, George W. Bush being president, and Obama being president, right? And at no point in any of those 9 cases were any of those guys willing to, sign off on Israel's illegal annexation of East Jerusalem and, essentially take that issue off the table, for any future U.S. brokered 2-state solution by actually like making that gesture of moving the embassy there, right? So it's like, yeah, unlike those like weak-kneed peaceniks like Nixon and Reagan, right? Like George W. Bush, right? That like Trump was willing to do that. Like the Trump administration, did this whole thing about how they weren't going to call it the West Bank anymore. They were going to call it Judea and Samaria, right? Like this is, yeah. So it's like, yeah, I think if Harris wins, all indications are she's not going to cut off weapons. And if Trump wins, all indications are that he's going to be even more enthusiastically pro-Israel than Biden was, right? So I just don't think that's happening. War with Iran, I mean, it's really hard to say. It's funny. I mean, we were talking about Obama earlier, and I was remembering in 2008 when he was running for president the first time, I went to at the campus that I was at that, right, at the University of Miami. I went with some like grad school friends of mine to go to some like, I don't know, it was like student lounge or something where there was like a viewing right of the debate. And after the debate was over, some like, I don't know if it was for like the student newspaper or some local thing, right? But it's like some reporter came up and talked to us and asked what we thought. And I remember that like my lib friends were really mad because I like said something bad about Obama to the reporter. That, I was like, yeah, I was, we said, oh, what do you think of the debate? I said, I was really disappointed that both Obama and McCain committed themselves to go into war with Iran, to defend Israel if it ever came to it. Right. So it's like, that has been U.S. policy for a long time. I don't think anybody wants it to happen because I think Netanyahu does. Right. But like, I don't think anybody else wants it to happen because it's so obvious that a war with Iran would be like way worse than the Iraq or Afghanistan wars.
The United States, yeah, I think it's obvious. I don't know about Israel.
Yeah,
I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but I don't know.
I think that's probably right. I mean, I think that Netanyahu's definitely been rattling the cage right a lot, right? But and he would certainly, I think Netanyahu would really like it if the United States went to war with Iran for him. I don't know that he wants to do it himself. But,
I agree. It's always better to have other people fight your fights for you.
Yeah, much easier for you.
Long believe that. Yeah,
exactly.
The hard way.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I hope that I mean, is it more likely we're going to cut off weapons or go to war with Iran? Sadly, I think it's probably more likely that we'll go to war with Iran, although I hope that's not going to happen. And I think that there's like a decent chance that it won't, but it's fucking scary. I mean, we're definitely close.
I guess I frame it that way because it seems like it's kind of, they're like Israel's pushing for it so hard that at some point it's got to be one or the other, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just a good question. I don't know.
Also, I've been surprised over the decades that we haven't gone to war with Iran, because it seems like there was a huge push for it internally under the Bush administration, and then a push largely exerted by Israel when Obama was trying to pass the Iran deal, and then there was a pretty famous like push within the Trump administration to invade Iran, and it seems like there's been a lot of resistance to that within the military and intelligence community, to the point that it's prevented it thus far. Like,
Yeah,
it
I mean,
seems
I think George W. Bush, like, if the war in Iraq had gone as well as he thought it would have, then who knows, right? Like, that was part of the original. Iran was in the original Axis of Evil speech.
Right.
That's, yeah, you never know, but it's in some ways, it's like, I mean, I think the United States just didn't have the capacity to do it at that point. I mean, that like Iraq was going so badly, and like so much was absorbed there. So I don't know. And then I don't know. I guess Trump almost went to war with Iran. Like,
Right.
he assassinated Soleimani, and then the Iranians retaliated. He retaliated for that. And like, he was like saying all this crazy shit about how he was going to like blow up all the mosques in Iran and stuff like this. And, the scuttlebutt was always that Tucker Carlson talked him out of it, which would be amazing if true. Yeah, it's like one of my least favorite people, but if he actually did that, I guess good for him. But yeah, it's that that like, I don't know, he was like watching Tucker that night, and Tucker thought we shouldn't go to war with Iran. I was like, okay, I guess we won't, right? So I don't know. I think that, like, yeah, I guess I'm talking myself into, there is a much greater chance of that than the weapons thing, but like, also I have to think the fact that it keeps not happening is some sign of like sanity, even within like the US political and defense establishment, about like just how bad that would be.
Yeah, it just feels like at some point there's gonna have to be a choice,
Yeah.
It feels like,
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I don't know how.
ceasefire is out the window. So
Yeah, I mean, I was like, when there was the general strike in Israel, I mean, I guess there was like the court order right away saying it was illegal, so they only, I don't know if they would have gone longer anyway, or they would have just made it short and symbolic, but like, that, like, that felt like, okay, other than the US cutting off weapons, this is like maybe the only thing I could imagine, like, actually forcing, Netanyahu to back down.
didn't get as much support as we might have liked either. I mean, I don't know a ton about that, I shouldn't even say, but it seemed like there were a lot of counter protests, and there was a pretty vocal.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the numbers, like, 'cause,
around
I mean, I mean, Hindustrit is pretty big. I think a lot of people did go on strike. I mean, I know there were big counter protests, but I'd be really curious if anybody's actually run the numbers on, how many people.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, Alpha Fata Kalfabung. That if you have an Iranian guest to suggest, I'm all ears. My DMs are open. But in any case, let's watch these last. I don't know if it lasts the whole 4 minutes, but there's 4 minutes left in the video, so let's see what's left.
I wouldn't.
You don't. Well, let me give you a final word then, just on what Benny said about Netanyahu. I assumed you'd agree.
No, not at all. Because for years I've been reading in the pages of the Israeli liberal press that Netanyahu's finished, Netanyahu will be out. But he keeps coming back. He keeps coming back. Like that old camp song, the cat came back. He wouldn't go away. Why does he keep coming back? It's a very simple reason. Netanyahu is an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. Let me repeat that. An obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. And in that respect, he's the perfect mirror of Israeli society. When they see Netanyahu, they see themselves, and that's why they vote for him.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm
No,
going to
but
leave it there. Thank you very much. Benny, I can't keep letting you go back at each other because unfortunately we've run out of time. We can do it again though. I think it's been a fascinating debate.
Can I just say? Can I have one more sentence?
One sentence.
Of the opinion polls, all the opinion polls in Israel today say that the majority of Israelis want Netanyahu out. So I'm not sure he actually reflects the will of the Israeli people.
I agree with that. That is indisputably true. But thank you both very much indeed. I'm glad we brought you together. That's it for now.
They're not going to elect anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they might, right? I mean, like, I think if there's like an election tomorrow, they might.
You think so?
Yeah, I think they might. I mean, it's just like, you know, I mean, look, Netanyahu's lost power before. He could lose power again. Like, I don't, you know, it's also, I mean, part of the deal too is it's not like he gets an absolute majority. You know, he has to like this is like one of the reasons actually this is like the most psychotically right-wing government in Israel's history, is that the only way he could like cobble together, you know, a governing coalition is by like having these like tiny like super crazy parties, you know, to join him. So I don't know. You know, he might win, he might lose, but like I guess my thing is like if he does lose, does that mean that he's going to be replaced by like, you know, the kind of liberal Israelis who I think Piers Morgan assumes are waiting in the wings, who are going to like do like a real two-state solution after that and all that stuff, right?
End of year, some crazy shit, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like, and even if it's like the slightly more liberal opposition, I mean, it's like I just don't, you know, unfortunately, I mean, it sucks, but I mean, like, I just don't think that there's, you know, like, I don't think there's anybody who can win an election in Israel right now who's going to do that, right? Like, I think that like it's the whole spectrum has swung, you know, wildly to the right, you know, certainly. Some of that's because of 10-7, but even before that, right? You know, I think that I think that the like the sort of nominal liberal opposition is like, you know, 12% better or something, right? You know, that like it's so, I mean, just I don't know. Like I guess like I see on this, if nothing else, I do see Benny Morris's point, right? There are all these opinion polls saying that Israelis want him out. You know, he certainly hasn't been very eager for there to be a new election, right? You know, but I think I agree with Norm, unfortunately, on the broader point, which is that it's like you just can't pin all this on Netanyahu as an individual.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I would also just like to say about Morris too. I think I even like texted you something about this after the first time I watched it, that like I just get this like creepy feeling from him, you know, like I think like Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, this is not Jerry Springer actually, it's Noam Chomsky, shout out. He describes Senator Mansfield in his book American Power and the New Mandarins as like the terror of our age. And he actually says it elsewhere too. I think he says it in Necessary Illusions, which is kind of funny because like Senator Mansfield was like a pretty unremarkable guy, you know? Like just like your typical like well-spoken, clean-cut politician.
Yeah, right.
Saying like terrifying things about the Vietnam War. And I get that feeling from Morris, like super highly respected in many ways for good reason, scholar, well-spoken, super smart guy, arguing that you should drop nuclear bombs
yeah, exactly,
more country than your own.
yeah you should drop nuclear bombs on a country that by any possible standard has been like far less aggressive than your country,
and that's
its neighbors, right?
Yeah.
You know, that like yeah, totally, right? And
terrifying kind of person, you know.
Yeah, and again, since there's some discussion about it in the chat, right? When I say a real two-state solution, I mean like, two actual states, right? Which wouldn't even be my preferred solution, right? I mean, I think they should just, like, I think that they should just, give everybody in their current borders equality, right? But but like what Western liberals imagine when they're imagining a two-state solution is Israel completely withdraws from the West Bank and Gaza, and like it withdraws to its pre-1967 borders, or more or less, right? And then there's just a normal state, right? That Army, Navy controls its own borders, all of that stuff that emerges, that like is allowed to be created, within, the other 22% of mandatory Palestine that like wasn't part of Israel's pre-1967 borders. And not even the most liberal governments in Israeli history have ever come close to offering that. Like if you actually look at any of the details of like the very few times in Israeli history when Israeli prime ministers have been willing to offer two-state deals, it never came anywhere close to that, right? It was always some kind of weird demilitarized semi-state crisscrossed with Israeli roads patrolled by Israeli soldiers and next settlement blocks, etc., right? Like, it was never anything like a real state. But two, even that's off the table now, right? Like even if Netanyahu lost to the comparatively liberal opposition, guys, Google is free. Check out what those people are saying, right? Like those people aren't even saying, oh, we should go back and like reoffer the Camp David stuff from 1999, right? I mean, that's unfortunately not part of mainstream Israeli politics right now, which is a huge problem. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's like, it's not, unfortunately, I don't think that sort of blaming it all on Netanyahu as an individual and sort of hoping that the normal operations of Israeli politics can like internally solve this problem. I think even if you, even accepting two-state framework, all that stuff, right? Like, I just don't think that's real, right? Like right now, I think that it's, under current circumstances, it's just not gonna, like, I just don't see any way that Israel would get to the point where it would actually allow that, without the larger geopolitical situation really changing in ways that would at bare minimum require the United States being willing to completely cut off support, right? Which is a depressing conclusion because we both agreed earlier that like that was extremely unlikely to happen anytime soon, right? So, but I think that is reality.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well,
sad ending.
I know. It sucks. It sucks. I wish we could have ended on a more optimistic note. I just don't see, I just don't see any way of justifying that,
Really not our fault.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, despite the depressing fact, which is just a very depressing thing about the current state of the world, this, it was still fun watching, watching this. So, yeah. Thank you so much.
I should plug my Substack.
Oh yeah, please.
Yep. It's the Hard Times Reviewer. It's Matthew Vernon Whalan .substack.com. Matthew with 2 T's, Whalan, Whalan. I think there's a link to it. Mostly focuses on prisons.
Yeah. There's some really harrowing stuff there because it's like specifically like don't get me wrong, I'm not volunteering to be imprisoned in any state in the United States, but or anywhere else, of course, right? Like I don't even want to be in a nice Norwegian prison, but but like even by American standards, some of these southern prisons you're talking about are really like grim, right?
Yeah,
so, yeah.
A lot of sources and stuff, so
yeah,
people living through it are often primarily telling the stories.
Yeah. No, it's the kind of reporting not a lot of people are doing. And sadly there's very little incentive to do right now. So yeah, do check out Matthew's Substack. I did put a link to it in the description, which is just below the box where you're watching us right now. And on that note, we will leave off for today. Thanks again, Matthew. Left is
Thanks,
best.
Always.